You want to know what betrayal feels like? It's not the knife in your back, it's the smile on the face of the person holding it. It's standing in your own home, surrounded by everything you built with your bare hands, and hearing some punk tell you it's time to leave. Time to leave. As if I was a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. As if 40 years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice meant nothing more than expired milk in his refrigerator. You need to move out. 4 words. That's all it took to shatter what I thought was unbreakable. Not a request. Not a suggestion. A command. From him. From the boy I welcomed into my family with open arms, who ate at my table, who called me dad with tears in his eyes on his wedding day. The same boy who now stood in my living room like he owned it, talking to me like I was some burden to be disposed of. Let me paint you the picture of that moment, because it's burned into my memory like a brand. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because Tuesday was the day I used to have lunch with my wife before she passed, and I'd been sitting in her favorite chair, thinking about her, when he walked in. Not knocked. Not asked permission. Walked in like he lived there. Which, I suppose, he thought he did. He was wearing one of those expensive suits, the kind I used to buy before I realized that real power doesn't need to advertise itself. His hair was slicked back with some product that probably cost more than most people make in a day. And his face. God, his face had this expression of practiced sympathy, like he'd rehearsed this moment in the mirror. Like he was doing me a favor. We need to talk, he said, and I knew immediately that we didn't include me as an equal participant. I was about to be talked at, not talked with. My daughter, my sweet, brilliant daughter who used to climb onto my lap and tell me stories about her imaginary friends, stood behind him like a shadow. She couldn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on some point on the floor, like the pattern in the Persian rug I'd bought in Istanbul 20 years ago was suddenly the most fascinating thing in the world. That rug has a story, you know. I was there on business, trying to close a deal that would make or break my company. The negotiations went late into the night, and I was exhausted, homesick, missing my wife and daughter terribly. I wandered into this little shop in the Grand Bazaar, and this old man showed me rug after rug, each one more beautiful than the last. When I saw this one, deep burgundy with gold threading that seemed to catch light from nowhere, I thought about how my wife's eyes would light up when she saw it. I paid 3 times what I should have for that rug, and spent another fortune shipping it home. But when I unrolled it in our living room and saw her face, saw her run her hands over the silk like she was touching a miracle, it was worth every penny. She used to say it was the most beautiful thing in our home. Now my daughter was staring at it like it was marking her shame. You need to move out, he continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been told no. This arrangement isn't working anymore. Arrangement. He called my life, my home, my existence an arrangement. Like I was some kind of business deal that had gone sour. And my daughter? My little girl who used to climb into my lap and tell me I was the strongest man in the world. She stood there like a statue, her eyes glued to that floor, saying nothing. Her silence cut deeper than any blade ever could. It was the silence of complicity, of choosing him over me, of abandoning the man who gave her everything for the man who promised her everything. I could feel my heart breaking in real time. Not the metaphorical heartbreak they write about in books, actual, physical pain in my chest, like someone was squeezing my heart with a fist made of ice. This was my daughter. The little girl I'd rocked to sleep every night when she had nightmares. The teenager I'd stayed up with when she was stressed about college applications. The young woman I'd walked down the aisle just 3 years ago, tears streaming down my face because I was so proud and so terrified of letting her go. And now she was letting me go. Without a fight. Without a word. Without even the courtesy of looking me in the eye while she did it. I could have fought. God knows I wanted to. I could have reminded them both that this penthouse, this fortress I built from nothing, still had my name on every deed, every document, every brick that held it together. I could have screamed about respect, about gratitude, about the years I'd sacrificed to give them everything they now took for granted. But I didn't. You know what I said? All right. Just like that. All right. 2 words that seemed to drain all the fight out of the room, all the tension out of their prepared arguments. They'd expected resistance. They'd expected drama. They'd gotten something far more dangerous, acceptance. I walked to my bedroom and started packing. Slowly, methodically, like I was preparing for a vacation rather than an exile. But here's what they didn't see, what they couldn't see because they'd already written me off as a defeated old man. In my eyes, there wasn't defeat. There was calculation. Cold, methodical, decades in the making calculation. Because I wasn't packing to leave. I was packing to take back everything he thought was his. You see, they made one fatal mistake. They assumed that because I was retired, because I was older, because I didn't fight back with fists and fury, that I was weak. They confused wisdom with weakness, patience with surrender. They forgot that the man who built an empire from nothing didn't get there by rolling over every time some young wolf decided to challenge him. Let me tell you who I really am. Not who they decided I was in that moment, but who I actually am. I'm the man who started with $50 and a dream in a one-room apartment that smelled like failure and regret. That apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that should have been condemned, with radiators that clanged all night and walls so thin you could hear every argument, every sob, every moment of despair from your neighbors. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college with a business degree that felt worthless in my hands and student loans that felt like anchors around my neck. My father, God rest his soul, had worked in a factory his entire life, came home every night with hands stained black and shoulders bent from years of manual labor. He used to tell me, son, you've got a choice. You can work with your hands and break your back, or you can work with your mind and break the world. I chose to break the world. Those first years were hell. I'm talking about eating ramen noodles for dinner because they were 12 cents a package and I needed every other penny to keep my business alive. I'm talking about working 18-hour days, 7 days a week, for years on end. I missed birthdays and anniversaries and Christmas mornings because I was building something bigger than myself, something that would last. My wife, beautiful, patient, understanding beyond measure, used to bring me sandwiches to the office at midnight because she knew I'd forgotten to eat again. She'd sit in that cramped, windowless room that served as my headquarters and listen to me rant about suppliers who wouldn't deliver, customers who wouldn't pay, competitors who were trying to steal my ideas. You're going to make it, she'd tell me, stroking my hair while I sat hunched over spreadsheets and invoices. I can see it in your eyes. You're not built to fail. And she was right. Slowly, painfully, brick by brick, I built something that mattered. I scraped together every penny, called in every favor, exploited every connection to create something that would last. Not just a business, a legacy. Something I could pass down to my children, something that would carry our family name long after I was gone. This penthouse isn't just 4 walls and expensive furniture. It's proof. Proof that a nobody from nowhere can become somebody who matters. Every marble tile I personally selected, running my hands over samples for hours until I found the exact shade that would catch the morning light just right. Every window I positioned to frame the skyline like a painting, because my wife loved to watch the sunrise and I wanted her to have the perfect view. Every room I designed with her voice whispering in my ear about how our children would grow up here, how our grandchildren would run through these halls, how this place would be the foundation of everything we built together. She had such specific ideas about how a home should feel, warm but elegant, comfortable but impressive, lived in but pristine. We spent months walking through furniture stores, art galleries, antique shops, building this place piece by piece until it felt like us. My late wife, God, how I miss her voice, how I miss her laugh, how I miss the way she hummed while she made coffee in the morning, her memory lives in every corner of this place. She picked out the colors, arranged the furniture, chose every painting on every wall. She made this house a home, turned 4 walls into a sanctuary where we could shut out the world and just be ourselves. And now they wanted to erase her. Erase us. Erase everything we built together. They thought this place was just real estate, just an asset to manage. They didn't understand that you can't put a price on memories, can't mortgage the laughter that still echoes in these walls, can't liquidate the love that's soaked into every floorboard. I thought my daughter would inherit this place with love, with understanding of what it represented. I thought she'd walk through these rooms someday with her own children, telling them stories about their grandfather who built this from nothing, about their grandmother who filled it with joy. Instead, her husband saw it as leverage, as something to exploit, as a stepping stone to his own ambitions. I watched him for months before that Tuesday afternoon, noting the little things that everyone else missed. The way he'd started taking phone calls in my study without asking permission, speaking in hushed tones about deals and opportunities and maximizing potential. The way he'd rearrange furniture when he thought I wasn't looking, moving my wife's favorite lamp to make room for his laptop, relocating the photo of our wedding day to make space for his business magazines. The way he'd make jokes about old-fashioned design and updating the space when friends came over, as if everything my wife and I had chosen was somehow quaint and outdated. As if our taste, our memories, our lives were obstacles to be overcome rather than treasures to be preserved. But the worst part, the absolute worst part that still makes my chest tighten with rage, was watching my daughter change. Her laughter used to fill every room in this place, bright and genuine and full of life. She'd throw her head back when something really amused her, and the sound would bounce off the high ceilings and wrap around you like a warm blanket. Now her laughter was careful, measured, designed to keep the peace. She'd cover her mouth when she giggled, as if spontaneous joy was somehow inappropriate. She stopped asking about my day, stopped sharing stories about her work, stopped being the vibrant, curious, passionate woman I'd raised her to be. She became his property instead of my daughter. I'd catch her sometimes, staring out the windows with this distant look in her eyes, and I'd wonder what she was thinking about. Was she remembering the conversations we used to have about everything and nothing? Was she missing the easy relationship we'd had before he came along and complicated everything? Or had she already started seeing me through his eyes, as an aging burden, a relic from a past she was ready to leave behind? Funny how people start measuring your value once you stop making money, I told myself as I folded my clothes into boxes they'd so thoughtfully provided. Because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? When I was generating wealth, when I was the provider, when my bank account was growing every month and my name was opening doors, I was valuable. I was respected. I was dad. But the moment I retired, the moment I stopped being a source of income and started being a source of expense, I became something else entirely. A burden. A liability. Dead weight that needed to be cut loose so they could really start living their lives. It's funny how retirement changes people's perception of you. One day you're a successful businessman whose advice is sought and whose opinion matters. The next day you're just another old man taking up space, using resources that could be better allocated elsewhere. The same mind that built an empire is suddenly considered obsolete because it's housed in a body that's slowing down. They forgot that experience doesn't retire. They forgot that the instincts that made me successful don't disappear just because I stopped going to an office every day. They forgot that the man who outsmarted every competitor, who survived every economic downturn, who built something lasting from nothing, might still have a few tricks left up his sleeve. So I stayed silent. I watched. I observed. And I learned just how deep their betrayal ran. The son-in-law started taking calls in my study. Not just taking them, but conducting entire business meetings like he owned the place. I'd walk by the door and hear him talking about the new design, about maximizing the space, about liquidating underutilized assets. He was talking about my home like it was his company's headquarters, like my life was just inventory to be managed and optimized. One afternoon, I heard him on a conference call with what sounded like real estate developers. The location is prime, he was saying, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone discussing a great opportunity. High floor, corner unit, completely renovated. The current situation is temporary. We'll have full control soon. Current situation. That's what I'd become. Not a person, not a father-in-law, not even an obstacle. Just a situation to be managed until it resolved itself. My daughter. She kept telling me it was only temporary, whenever she bothered to speak to me at all. We just need a little time to figure things out, Dad. You understand, right? But her eyes wouldn't meet mine when she said it. She knew it was a lie. She knew this was permanent, that they'd already made their decision about my future. She was just too much of a coward to admit it to my face. The conversations between them that I wasn't supposed to hear became more frequent and more detailed. They'd wait until they thought I was asleep, then gather in the kitchen to discuss their plans in whispered tones that somehow carried more menace than if they'd been shouting. The market is perfect right now, I heard him say one night around 2 a.m. Properties like this are selling within days. We could have the money liquid in a month. But what about Dad? My daughter asked, and for a moment, I thought maybe she still cared, maybe there was still hope. What about him? Came the reply. He's got enough saved to get a nice little apartment somewhere. Maybe one of those senior communities. He'd probably be happier with people his own age. A senior community. They wanted to warehouse me with other discarded parents, other inconvenient elderly people who'd outlived their usefulness. They wanted to shuffle me off to some sterile facility where I could play bingo and complain about my medications until I had the courtesy to die and stop being a problem. The rage that built in my chest during those late-night eavesdropping sessions was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was pure, white-hot fury mixed with heartbreak so profound it felt like drowning. This was my daughter, my little girl, planning my exile like I was some kind of unwanted furniture that needed to be moved to storage. But even worse than their words was what I learned about their actions. Then I started overhearing the late-night whispers about selling the property. Not just my property, they were already treating it as theirs before they'd even asked permission. They discussed square footage and market values and renovation potential like they were planning their dream home, not destroying mine. We could open up this wall, I heard my daughter say one evening, her voice bright with excitement. Make the kitchen bigger. And this whole area could be redesigned for entertaining. This whole area. She was talking about the corner where my wife used to sit and read, where her favorite chair still held the impression of her body, where I still sometimes caught the faint scent of her perfume on quiet afternoons. They were treating the penthouse as theirs while I was still living in it, still breathing in it, still grieving in it. They'd already mentally divided up everything I'd spent my life building, allocated my memories to the trash bin, assigned dollar values to everything I held sacred. And then came the boxes. Not my boxes, their boxes. A delivery truck pulled up one Thursday morning with pre-packed containers, professional moving supplies, bubble wrap and tape and labels. They were packing me up before they'd even officially asked me to leave. The audacity was breathtaking. The disrespect was crushing. But you know what? It was also illuminating. Because in that moment, watching them stack boxes in what used to be my wife's reading room, I realized exactly who they really were underneath all the fake concern and manufactured sympathy. They were thieves. Elegant, well-dressed, family thieves, but thieves nonetheless. They were stealing my home, my dignity, my remaining years, and they were doing it with smiles on their faces and love on their lips. They thought I was too old to notice, I whispered to myself as I watched them plan my erasure. But I noticed everything. Every slight. Every assumption. Every moment they treated me like furniture to be moved around rather than the man who built the foundation they were standing on. I noticed it all, and I filed it all away for later. Because while they were busy planning my exile, I was planning something else entirely. Instead of reacting with anger, and God knows I wanted to, God knows the rage was burning through my veins like acid, I planned. I made myself a cup of tea in the kitchen my wife had designed, sat down at the desk she'd bought me for our 20th anniversary, and I planned. That desk has its own story, you know. I'd been complaining for months about working at the kitchen table, spreading papers and files across the surface where we ate dinner, making everything smell like ink and stress. For our anniversary, instead of jewelry or flowers, she surprised me with this massive oak desk that had belonged to some banker from the 1920s. "Every king needs a throne," she'd said, running her hands over the smooth wood surface. "And every businessman needs a proper desk." It took 6 men to carry it up to the penthouse, and she supervised every step, making sure they didn't scratch the walls or damage the finish. That desk became my command center, the place where I made the decisions that shaped our future. And now, sitting in the chair she'd picked out to go with it, I was about to make the most important decision of my life. I opened the locked drawer that contained the original property documents. Every signature, every clause, every legal detail exactly as I'd left it years ago when we'd first bought this place. The papers were yellowed with age but still perfectly legible, still legally binding, still protecting everything we'd built together. And there, in her beautiful handwriting, was my wife's signature as witness. Even gone, she was still protecting me. Even from the grave, she was still my partner in this fight. My wife wasn't just beautiful, she was brilliant. Street smart in a way that complemented my book learning, practical in a way that balanced my big picture thinking. When we bought this place, when I was focused on the purchase price and the mortgage terms and the investment potential, she was thinking about protection. "We should put it under a personal trust," she'd said one evening as we reviewed the paperwork. "Just in case." "Just in case what?" I'd asked, distracted by interest rates and tax implications. "Just in case someone ever tries to take what's ours," she'd replied with that knowing smile of hers, the one that meant she was thinking 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. I thought she was being paranoid at the time. Who would try to take our home? We were a solid family, financially secure, legally protected. What could possibly go wrong? Now I realized she wasn't being paranoid. She was being prophetic. The personal trust she'd insisted on made the penthouse immune to joint claims. It couldn't be mortgaged without my explicit consent. It couldn't be sold without my signature. It couldn't be touched by anyone except me. My wife had made sure of that, had insisted on protections I thought we'd never need. I ran my finger over her handwriting on the witness page, traced the elegant loops and curves of her signature, and whispered, "You always were smarter than me, weren't you?" Then I called my longtime lawyer, the same man who'd helped me build my business from nothing, who'd guided me through every major decision of my adult life, who'd been at our wedding and my wife's funeral and knew exactly what this family meant to me. "Harold," I said when he picked up the phone. "It's time to review the trust." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Harold was old school, careful with words, thoughtful in his responses. But he'd known me for 30 years, had seen me through every crisis and triumph, and he could read between the lines better than anyone. "How bad is it?" he asked finally. "Bad enough," I replied. "But not as bad as it's about to get for them." "I'll clear my schedule," he said. "Can you be here in an hour?" While they planned my future, I gathered evidence. Not just the obvious documents, the deed, the trust papers, the insurance policies, but everything. Bank statements showing who'd paid for what. Receipts for every improvement, every piece of furniture, every painting on every wall. Tax filings proving ownership and responsibility. Utility bills in my name. Maintenance records showing my care for the property. I built a paper trail that would make it absolutely clear who owned what, who had rights to what, who had built this life from nothing and who had simply walked into it expecting to inherit everything without earning any of it. But as I dug deeper into my files, as I organized decades of financial records and legal documents, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Their betrayal went far beyond just wanting my home. The son-in-law had used my address to secure a business loan. Not his address, mine. He'd listed the penthouse as collateral for his failing company, mortgaging equity that didn't exist, using my credit and my property to guarantee his debts. The paperwork was hidden in a stack of mail he'd been helping me organize. Loan documents with my address listed as the collateral property, with my phone number listed as the contact for the guarantor, with my name forged on documents I'd never seen before. He'd been stealing my identity while planning to steal my home. The bank had been calling my number for weeks because I was supposedly guaranteeing a loan I'd never heard of, for a business I wanted nothing to do with, backed by property I'd never agreed to risk. Every time they called, I'd politely told them I'd look into it, thinking it was some kind of mistake. Now I realized the mistake was trusting him. When the bank called the next time, I played along. "Oh yes," I said in my most helpful voice, "I'll look into that right away. Just send me copies of all the documentation so I can review everything properly." But privately, I forwarded every document to Harold, who confirmed what I already suspected: the son-in-law's actions weren't just unethical, they were criminal. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. He'd committed multiple felonies while sitting at my dinner table and calling me Dad. "Stay quiet," Harold warned me during our meeting. "Don't tip them off until we have everything we need. If he realizes we know what he's done, he might try to cover his tracks or disappear entirely." "Don't worry," I told him, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "Sometimes patience isn't weakness. It's bait." So I waited. And while I waited, I prepared for war. I transferred my wealth into protected accounts they couldn't touch, trusts they couldn't access, investments they couldn't liquidate. Every penny I'd earned, every dollar I'd saved, every asset I'd accumulated over 40 years of hard work, all of it moved beyond their reach. I canceled the shared utilities and put everything back in my name only. Electric, gas, water, internet, cable, everything that made the penthouse livable was now under my exclusive control. If they wanted to live here, they'd need my permission for every light switch, every hot shower, every moment of comfort. I rewired ownership records to reflect reality rather than their fantasies. Building management, insurance companies, city records, everyone who needed to know was informed that I was the sole owner and that no decisions about the property could be made without my direct authorization. I instructed the building manager not to release any information about the property without my written consent. No tours for potential buyers, no appraisals for real estate agents, no access for anyone claiming to represent my interests. And then, because my wife always loved grand gestures and believed that important moments deserved proper ceremony, I sent flowers to her memorial niche at the cemetery and whispered, "You'd have enjoyed this part, wouldn't you?" I could almost hear her laughing, that bright, delighted sound she made when she was truly happy about something. She'd always had a streak of mischief in her, a love of justice that went beyond simple fairness into the realm of poetic comeuppance. She would have absolutely loved watching these two get exactly what they deserved. The house became a pressure cooker over the next few days. The son-in-law was confident, strutting around like he'd already won, making plans and taking calls and acting like the man of the house. My daughter was anxious, sensing something was wrong but unable to name it, jumping at sudden noises and asking too many questions about my day. And me? I was impossibly calm. Eerily calm. The kind of calm that comes right before the storm hits, when the air pressure drops and the wind stops and every animal instinct screams that something terrible is about to happen. They mistook my composure for acceptance. They thought I'd given up, rolled over, accepted my fate as a discarded old man. They had no idea I was sitting on enough evidence to destroy everything they'd built their future on. I went about my normal routine, morning coffee in my wife's favorite mug, afternoon walks around the neighborhood, evening news in my leather chair, but underneath the surface, I was a coiled spring waiting for the perfect moment to release. Friday night, they went out to dinner with friends. I heard them in the hallway, making plans to celebrate something. I could only imagine what they thought they were celebrating. My surrender, perhaps. Their victory. The successful disposal of an inconvenient obstacle. While they were gone, I made my final preparations. I packed a small bag with essentials, not because I was planning to leave, but because I wanted them to think I was beaten, broken, ready to shuffle off quietly into whatever retirement home they'd selected for me. I left the bag visible by the front door, a prop in the performance I was about to give. Saturday morning arrived like Judgment Day. I was in the kitchen, making coffee and pretending to read the newspaper, when the doorbell rang. The son-in-law was expecting movers, his movers, the ones he'd hired to clear out the remnants of my life and make room for their new beginning. Instead, when he opened the door, his face went white as paper. Standing in the hallway were a bank representative, a severe woman in a tailored suit carrying a briefcase that looked like it could hold nuclear launch codes. My lawyer Harold, looking like the avenging angel he'd always been in the courtroom. The building manager, clearly uncomfortable but legally obligated to be present. And two men in badges who introduced themselves as investigators from the district attorney's office. I watched from the kitchen as they stepped inside, as they spread documents across my dining room table like dealers laying out cards for the final hand of poker. The son-in-law's confidence evaporated in real time, replaced by confusion, then fear, then the kind of desperate panic that comes when you realize you've been caught red-handed. "There must be a mistake," he stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's caught sneaking back into the house after curfew. "This is impossible. This can't be happening." The banker, a cold, professional woman who'd probably seen this scenario play out 100 times before, looked at him with the kind of pity you'd reserve for a small, stupid animal that had just run into traffic. "The only mistake," she said, her voice as sharp as broken glass, "was assuming you owned what you didn't." The investigators began reading from a list of charges that seemed to go on forever. Identity theft. Fraud. Forgery. Criminal impersonation. Each word hit him like a physical blow, and I watched his legs actually wobble as the full scope of his situation became clear. My daughter stood between them, pale and shaking like a leaf in a hurricane, finally understanding that the ground she thought was solid had been quicksand all along. She turned to me with tears streaming down her face and whispered, "He can't do this, can he?" I looked at her, not with anger, because the anger had burned itself out during those long nights of planning. I looked at her with disappointment, which was so much worse than rage. Disappointment that cut deeper than any shouted accusation, that spoke of broken trust and shattered expectations and love betrayed by the person who should have protected it above all else. "No, sweetheart," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the emotions churning in my chest. "He can't. And I won't let him." Behind us, two movers, my movers, the ones I'd hired to remove the cancer from my home, began carrying the son-in-law's belongings out of what had never been his apartment. His expensive suits, his electronics, his business magazines, his protein powder and hair products and all the other accessories of his carefully constructed image. The bank representative explained that his accounts were being frozen immediately pending investigation. The fraudulent loan documents had triggered a federal inquiry that would examine every aspect of his business dealings. His company's assets were being seized as potential proceeds of criminal activity. Within hours, word had spread through his professional network like wildfire. Who wants to do business with a man who commits fraud against his own family? Who trusts someone willing to forge documents and steal identities? Who invests with someone whose idea of business strategy includes identity theft and elder abuse? His business partners, discovering that their collateral was based on forged documents and stolen property, withdrew their investments faster than rats fleeing a sinking ship. His clients, learning that their trusted advisor was under criminal investigation, moved their accounts to competitors. His reputation, built over years of careful networking and strategic positioning, crumbled in a matter of days. Within 48 hours, his company was finished. Within a week, he was facing criminal charges that could put him away for decades. Within a month, he was a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms across the city. The young hotshot who thought he could outsmart an old lion and ended up destroying himself in the process. My daughter. She moved out in shame, finally understanding how deeply his manipulation had run, how completely he'd used her as a weapon against me. She'd chosen him over me, abandoned the father who'd given her everything for the man who'd promised her everything, and in return, he'd chosen himself over everyone. But here's the thing about justice, real justice, not the Hollywood version with dramatic speeches and tearful reconciliations. Real justice is quiet. It doesn't need to boast or grandstand or explain itself. It simply is. I didn't gloat as I watched his life fall apart. Gloating is for small men who win small victories. This wasn't small. This was justice. And justice doesn't need to boast, it simply unfolds with the inexorable force of gravity. I paid off what needed paying, the fraudulent loan that had illegally used my property as collateral, the legal fees for untangling his web of deception, the costs of restoring my credit and my reputation. I closed what needed closing, accounts he'd opened in my name, business relationships he'd contaminated, connections he'd poisoned with his crimes. And I restored order to the chaos they'd created. Not because I had to, but because that's what real men do. We clean up messes, even messes we didn't make. We take responsibility, even when the fault lies elsewhere. We build things back up, even when others have torn them down. Now the penthouse is silent again. The good kind of silent. The peaceful kind. The kind of silence that comes after the storm has passed and the damage has been assessed and the rebuilding has begun. I walk through each room every morning, a ritual I've developed to reclaim the space that was almost stolen from me. In the living room, I straighten the picture of my wife and me on our honeymoon, taken on a beach in Greece where she laughed so hard at something I'd said that she snorted, which made us both laugh even harder. In the dining room, I run my hand along the table where we hosted countless dinner parties, where my daughter did her homework while I worked late into the night, where my wife and I used to sit with our morning coffee and plan our days. In the study, I sit at the desk she bought me and review my investments, manage my affairs, correspond with old friends and new business partners. The chair still holds my shape after all these years, still feels like home in a way that no other piece of furniture ever has. I'm older, yes, the stress of the past few months has added years to my face and gray to my hair. But the stillness feels earned. It feels like victory, though a bitter one. Victory over people I once loved, in a war I never wanted to fight. I've reconnected with old friends who drifted away during the chaos of family drama. We meet for lunch, play golf, share stories about our children and grandchildren and the complicated relationships that define our later years. They understand what I've been through in ways that younger people can't. I've started mentoring young entrepreneurs who remind me of myself at their age, hungry, driven, willing to work 18-hour days and sacrifice everything for their dreams. I see myself in their eyes, remember what it felt like to bet everything on a vision that others couldn't see. There's a young woman, Maria, who's trying to build a catering business from nothing. She reminds me of my wife, practical but ambitious, careful with money but willing to take calculated risks. I've invested in her company, not because I need the returns but because I believe in her vision. There's a young man, James, who's developing a new kind of financial software. He has the same intensity one once had, the same willingness to put everything on the line for something he believes in. I've introduced him to potential clients, opened doors that might have stayed closed for years. I've filled the emptiness with purpose, replaced the family that betrayed me with chosen family that values me for who I am rather than what I can provide. When my daughter finally visited months later, and it took months for her to work up the courage, months of her calling and hanging up, months of her driving by the building without coming upstairs, I listened more than I spoke. She looked terrible. Thin, pale, aged beyond her years by stress and guilt and the realization of what she'd lost. She'd been living in a small apartment across town, working double shifts to pay rent she'd never had to worry about before, learning to budget and scrimp and make do without the financial cushion she'd taken for granted her entire life. "Dad," she said, and her voice broke on the word. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She apologized for hours, crying until I thought she might drown in her own tears. She said she'd been manipulated, that he'd convinced her I was becoming a burden, that moving me out was the kindest thing for everyone involved. She said she'd been scared of confronting him, scared of losing him, scared of being alone. "I made the biggest mistake of my life," she sobbed into my shoulder. "I chose him over you, and he threw me away the moment things got difficult. I lost everything, Dad. Everything." I forgave her. Of course I forgave her. She's still my daughter, still the little girl who used to fall asleep in my arms while I read her bedtime stories. Still the teenager who came to me with broken hearts and big dreams. Still the young woman I walked down the aisle with tears streaming down my face because I was so proud of who she'd become. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. You can repair damage, but you can't unsee it. You can forgive betrayal, but you can't forget the moment when the person you loved most chose someone else over you. The trust between us, like the old marble floor that still bears a permanent crack from where he once dropped a bottle of wine in his arrogance, will never be quite the same. We can build something new, something functional, but the original is gone forever. You can repair damage, I told her as she sobbed in my arms like the child she used to be. You can't unsee it. We're working on rebuilding our relationship. She comes for dinner once a week, helps me with small tasks around the penthouse, tells me about her new job and her new life. We're careful with each other, polite in a way we never used to be, testing the boundaries of this new dynamic. But sometimes, when she thinks I'm not looking, I catch her staring at the photos on the mantel. Pictures of her childhood, of family vacations, of birthdays and graduations and all the moments that defined our family before everything fell apart. And I can see the regret in her eyes, the understanding of what she threw away and can never fully recover. So here I am now, standing in the penthouse that was always mine, surrounded by everything I built with my own hands and protected with my own will. They thought retirement meant surrender. They thought age meant weakness. They forgot I'd spent a lifetime building things that last, learning lessons that stick, developing instincts that never fade. They forgot that the foundations I laid were deeper than their schemes, stronger than their greed, more permanent than their temporary alliance against me. I pour myself a drink, good scotch, the kind my wife used to buy me for special occasions, the kind that costs more than most people make in a week, and stand at the window overlooking the skyline. The city spreads out below me like a kingdom I've conquered, lights twinkling in the darkness like stars fallen to earth. Somewhere out there are other men like me, other fathers being told they're too old to matter, too worn out to fight back, too tired to defend what they've built. Men whose children have been poisoned against them by smooth-talking strangers who see opportunity in family dysfunction. To them I say this, don't let them convince you that your time is over. Don't let them treat you like furniture to be moved around at their convenience. Don't let them mistake your patience for weakness or your wisdom for defeat. The young wolves think they're hungry, think they're clever, think they can outmaneuver the old lion with their energy and their ambition and their willingness to break rules that we've always followed. But they forget something crucial, the old lion didn't get old by being weak. He got old by being stronger, smarter, and more ruthless than all the young wolves who came before. They see our gray hair and think we're finished. They see our slower movements and think we're helpless. They see our reluctance to fight and think we're defeated. But they don't understand that everything they see as weakness is actually strength refined by experience. We've learned to choose our battles carefully because we've fought enough of them to know which ones matter. We've learned to think strategically because we've seen the consequences of acting impulsively. We've learned to plan for the long term because we understand that quick victories often lead to permanent defeats. And when push comes to shove, when the chips are down and the cards are on the table, when everything we've built is threatened by people who didn't earn it and don't deserve it, we remember exactly who we are and what we're capable of. Experience beats enthusiasm every single time. Wisdom trumps energy. Strategy defeats tactics. And the patient predator always outlasts the hyperactive prey. I built this empire from nothing. I survived every challenge, every betrayal, every attempt to tear down what I'd created. I've weathered economic downturns that destroyed my competitors, navigated personal tragedies that would have broken weaker men, and emerged from every crisis stronger than before. And I'm still here, still standing, still the man who owns everything they thought they could take. They wanted to write my ending, to conclude my story on their terms with their timeline according to their needs. Instead, they wrote their own ending, a cautionary tale about greed and betrayal and the dangerous assumption that age equals weakness. And mine. Mine continues. Older, perhaps. Sadder, certainly. Wiser, definitely. But stronger than ever, and completely, utterly, unequivocally undefeated. Because somewhere tonight, another father is being told he's too old to matter, that his time is up, that he needs to step aside and let the next generation take over. And tomorrow, if he has any wisdom at all, he's going to remind them that he built everything they're standing on, that he survived everything they think will break him, and that underestimating him will be the last mistake they ever make. The old lion may be graying, but his claws are still sharp, his instincts are still deadly, and his roar can still shake the ground beneath anyone foolish enough to threaten his den.